Swainer was building towards this last pull throughout the race. He was doing mammoth turns, minute pulls, minute and a half. I've done a lot of team time trials and 2-up time trials with Swaino, and he starts to get this bit of a rock on, bums to go side to side, and he tucks his head down like a little bulldog. And Swaino's just started opening up, and you can start getting the rock on, and you're sort of thinking, yeah, it's okay. You're in the wheel, you're tucked away, like, yeah, who's on the front? Oh, I must be, going pretty quick here at 60 k's an hour or whatever. And then eventually it just doesn't stop. Swaino's meant to finish first, but he's on the front now. Like,
he's going to blow.
We're going to lose this because Swaino's on the front now, and he's got a K to go. Like, we're going to slow down. And then just kept going. And I was just like, this guy's insane. I think I was third wheel behind Matthews, and Matthews is fast, obviously, and we're all just trying to step out and finish side on, so I'm thinking we probably should be going quicker here. I'll probably go up next to him and we'll finish together, and pop my head out, and then I'm like, all right, here we go. Got a big sprint up next to Swaino, and I just stayed exactly where I was. I should have just stayed in the wheel, unless I just pushed an extra 100 watts for the exact same thing. So I just stood out, and we all just moved out of the line. Let's just get a bit of wind in our face, and stayed the exact same distance. It was Swaino, Matthews, me, Cam, whatever, Weendog, and we all just went yeah, well, we're not finishing side by side. Couldn't. He didn't even get out of his saddle.
This is Michael Matthews.
That final turn of Swaino, that I think he did literally one and a bit K pull for his last turn. It was unbelievable how much power he had at the end of a triple T where we were all on our hands and knees coming into the finish, and he just kept pulling. It was honestly like he had an engine in his bike. I don't often get dropped in any sort of discipline of cycling, but this was pretty incredible. On the flat, I would love to look back at my power of what I was doing on the wheel and see what he was doing, because that's something that really in my head is just, it's incredible. And that's one thing that really thought in the race, this guy deserves this. If we do win, he deserves this pink jersey because he is the strongest here.
So welcome, everybody. My name is Randy Ferguson, and welcome to these conversations presented by Bridge the Gap. This will be the first of a series, and today we are going to be very privileged to welcome none other than a 10-year professional cyclist, Svein Tuft. Before we get into our little conversation with Svein, I'd just like to say welcome to everybody. Thank you to everybody that has been involved getting this up and going, and also thank you to everybody that's participated. We've had a lot of return on our invitations, may it just be question-wise and also presence-wise, so thank you very much. And once again, these conversations are brought to you by Bridge the Gap. Bridge the Gap over the last few years has enabled a lot of athletes to make that transition over to Europe or to bigger racing. But also its most, I think, rewarding key point has been the fact that we've had great mentors, and Svein has been one of them. It was put on the rails by Will Routley, Ryan Anderson, and also with the help of Svein and others in 2012. The global relay was the support behind it, securing almost $400,000 to seed the fund. And it's been great to have people like Will, Ryan, Andrew Pinfold, Svein, and Aaron Willock to oversee and steer the fund over the years. And it's nearly 100 grants awarded already over the last 8 years, helping from the U17 group up. And it's very good to have the opportunity to join this family on our conversation today. Well, he's had one of the most unique professional careers in all of pro cycling. He is a man who's had a lot to say in the world of cycling professionally. He's someone also that still has a lot to say. He's not a man of many words, but he's definitely someone that we all listen to when he speaks. And I invite you to listen and share with him over the next hour or so. And hey, anytime after that, he's very available. He's back in Canada. Let's say hi, everybody, to Svein Tuft.
Hey, guys. First of all, thanks for having me. And I want to applaud everyone who's been working behind the scenes to make this happen. I think it's pretty awesome. Now we can create a place to get these discussions going for for all of you. And I know for myself, trying to make that jump, trying to make it to the next level, there's never a clear way, but there's something that we can do here where we can create the discussion around how best to go about that. And if just a few things click today, then I feel like what we're trying to do here is really been successful. So thank you everyone for checking in and having a listen.
Well, it's great to have you with us, Svein. And as I just mentioned in the preamble, you've moved back to Canada. The pandemic kind of throwing a bit of a curveball into your plans that you had in Andorra and in Europe. However, you didn't stop the brain juices. You kept on going with new projects and all that. And what we want to do today with this Bridge the Gap event is to give athletes that some of them are not yet at the point to evolve to move over to Europe or to any professional types of dreams, but are dreaming about it. And also joining us are a lot of athletes that have already made the transition and may have some questions about how to go about it. As you mentioned, it's been something that's been not easy for a lot of athletes. We know you and I both stories of athletes that unfortunately saw their dreams maybe fizzle and dwindle away because there wasn't that preparation, there wasn't that help to go over it. So the format that we decided to go with, Svein, today was to have athletes send some pre-questions before this interview, and for you to really pick out a few that kind of how could I say, join almost organically to your story and how those questions were answered through your history as a pro cyclist. Before we get into that, really shortly, Svein, I think it's very important that we talk about, what have you done since you've retired over the last, 18 months now?
Well, I'm going to say for anyone who's retiring out of professional sport, it's a very interesting time of life. Let's put it that way. You think you kind of have an idea of what it's going to look like, but I tell you, it's a very big transition, because that life of cycling, as you guys know, it's day in and day out. You're thinking about, you're planning, you're kind of obsessing about how to become a better athlete. And one of the things that happens as you transition out of that, there's not a lot of tools, and there's not a lot of talk amongst teams or people around in cycling about how best to do that, because the idea is always moving forward. How do we push to be better and better and better? And you moving on with your life is not really an interest to anyone in the racing world. So yeah, it's been a big transition, and I think that's a big hole in the game right now, like trying to help our athletes transition out of that world. But I will say I've been lucky in the sense of getting a few projects on the go. In Andorra, I was starting a gravel touring company right when the whole pandemic came across. And well, that kind of altered our decisions in life. And my family and I, we decided to get back to Canada, where our families are from. And being away all these years, it's like that's a big part of something we miss. So yeah, to be back in Canada, it's been an absolute pleasure. And, now I'm working with a few friends, Kevin Field and Ryan Anderson, on a few projects that will be coming out in the next little while. But, it's about applying that work ethic and that energy towards those new things. And it's actually very exciting. And you realize how much of the world is out there that's very different from the life I lived before. So that's been an awesome experience.
That's interesting to hear, Svein. And also, we will, if we have some time at the end, we'll chit chat a bit, because there you are, I think, participating in writing a book a bit about your story. So that's something, if we have some time at the end, we'll discuss. How about we get into the questions, because we've had some really interesting questions. And as we mentioned in the preamble, some of the questions have really hit a sensitive chord with you, where you felt that you've gone through this in your career. Moments of your career pop up, and we want to make sure that you can pass it on, transmit that information, that passion, and those learning experience that you had. We're going to welcome, she's in Belgium right now. She's a Canada Games gold medalist. She was 9th at Worlds, and she's going to be the first to ask her killer question today. Let's welcome Gillian Ellsay. Hey, Gillian.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. Yourself? What was your question for Svein?
Yeah, my question is a bit long, but you mentioned in a recent interview that you're not content without struggle. Is this something that you've always known, or has this been a bit of a recent realization about yourself?
Well, first off, Gillian, I want to say it's an excellent question. And I think it's something that maybe a lot of us who are striving at endurance sport or trying to get to the top level of any sport, I think we're all kind of wired a special way, and I used to wonder about myself in my younger years, like what's wrong with me? Like training was so important to me, and pushing myself on the bike was everything. And I didn't really understand it at that time. And, after 20 plus years of riding my bike and trying to compete and go through the whole process of going as far as I personally could, that's one of the things I came to really understand about myself, is that it became such a big part of my wiring, such a part of the satisfaction I got out of life was that working hard on a bike, was pushing myself, was like kind of getting to those next levels, right? And I'll say that I didn't know how that was going to work when I transitioned out of the sport. But I found I'm still the same person, and I still need to push myself. I still need that little bit of struggle. And for me, it's what gives me value in my life. It's what allows me to just be a better dad, to be more present. If I can get those moments where, I don't know, you sweat on a climb, it's the satisfaction you get from that work. And whether nowadays it's switched to ski touring or different things where maybe I get that little bit of adrenaline, and it just allows me to enjoy so many other aspects of my life. And I think that's a realization that took some time for me to get to, but understanding that has really helped me coordinate my life and actually enjoy things a lot more, instead of always kind of obsessing about, oh, did I do enough work today? Or, did I do enough? Right. It's just understanding more and more about yourself. And I think that's one of the most important things as you guys all go through this journey, is like, really, we can listen to lots of people and lots of different ideas and training ideas and so on and so forth. But how it applies to you is going to be the most important part of that, right? How it actually works in your life, right? Someone might have the best training technique, or they're living a certain way that just looks awesome, but it might not work for you, right? So you take bits and pieces of what everyone's saying, and hopefully all of these conversations, you can learn a lot. Certain things might not apply to you, but the ones that do can really take you a long way. And I think that's great question.
Does that answer your question, Gillian, or anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, I think taking out the bits and pieces of advice and then making them yourself is great. Yeah.
Thanks, Gillian. Best of luck this season. We're going to move now to Carson Mattern. Carson, who rides with Ascent Cycling, aiming for the team pursuit, first-year junior, and also a Paris Olympic hopeful. Anyway, that's part of his dream. And Carson, what was your question for Svein today?
Yeah, so my question today is, Svein, knowing what you know now, if you could go back in time and have a conversation with your 17-year-old self, what is the biggest, most important piece of advice or knowledge you would know them for what's ahead?
Yeah. Okay. My story was different. I wasn't a cyclist at the age of 17. I didn't start racing a bike till the age of 23. So I'll just alter the question a little bit. If I could go back to my 23-year-old self, it's that, I was very confused at that time of my life. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And I think, the idea of getting into cycling and believing that it was going to work for me. I just had this hard-headed, stubborn idea that I wanted to become a professional at that point. It just, something switched in my mind, and that was it. So I kind of had that single-minded, narrow focus, and that's really great. But with that, you skip a lot of life. And so I guess what I would have tell myself is that this is a long road. It could be 10 years. And you really need to make sure that you're enjoying this process. And that was one thing I was lucky, is that I loved the training. I loved going to new places and exploring new places. So I always had that as a foundation. So that was my fun. So that helped me kind of have this long career. And I guess, if I was to say anything, it's that belief in yourself. It's going to take 10 years, so you better be having a lot of fun. And I think those are kind of the simple things, because we could go very deep into that. But if it's right now for some of you, if it's like almost like torture of some of your training, which sometimes the training can be very torturous, but there should be like a passion to it. There should be a love to it. There should be that feeling of accomplishment from it, instead of like, oh, this, I see some people and it just seems like they dread their training and they dread their time racing. And I question, why are you doing this? So yeah, for me, it's a long road. Enjoy it. And because we don't know what the outcome, there was a lot of times in my life I could have just turned at a few crossroads, made a different decision, and a totally different outcome. I never would have made it as a cyclist, So I think it's just kind of letting go of just being so intense and this single-minded focus. Yeah, we need that, but you need to like let go when you're away from it a bit, and just kind of have that extra balance in life. Because I feel like nowadays, with so much data and so much knowledge of training, it can be a bit too much for some of the young folks. And I think, for myself, I just had a heart rate strap back in the day, and I went by average speed. That was the extent of my day. And that's pretty simplistic, I know, but in the reality, it was the best thing for me at that time, because I think knowing what kind of power people could do would have just blown my mind. I if I had to see what Filippo Ganna's power file was for world time trials, I would just throw the bike away and never try again, So yeah, I think it's just about disconnecting a bit from all of the data and the stuff that we're exposed to.
Is that good for you, Carson?
Yeah, that covers it. Just want to say thanks for taking the time to come talk to us, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us, Carson, and all the best with your future plans and striking along here. We'll cross our fingers for this season, but keep that training up and in the minding that Svein just brought to the table. Very interesting. We're now going to move to tag race team member Thomas Schellenberg. Thomas, who's represented Canada at Worlds, also another Paris Olympic hopeful. So, Thomas, what's your question for Svein today? Can you hear us, Tom? Yeah, I don't know if Tom can hear us. We maybe will. Oh. Hey, Tom.
Hey, how's it going?
Good yourself. Go ahead.
So my question is it more valuable to learn to win races at a slightly lower level, only then moving on to bigger races, or to immerse oneself in the full European racing scene and learn through having one's head kicked in at nearly every race?
That's another fantastic question, and something I working and trying to help athletes a lot. It's something I run into a lot, and both avenues have their pluses and minuses, right? There's a lot to take from going to Europe and just getting, as you say, your head kicked in, and unfortunately, for your first year, that is quite often the case. And it's something like it's really good to be aware of, unless you're a super phenom like Peter Sagan was at the age of 19. But very few of us have that kind of crazy talent. So I've always believed that you need to basically at home in your local races and in your local province, and when you race within North America, you need to be a presence. You need to always be part of the race. You need to be a factor. Before we talk about moving on to Europe and joining teams and this and that, you need to be a guy that's like lapping the criterium field in your local race. You need to be winning the local bike race by minutes. That's my belief, and everyone can take what they want out of this, but I always say, like, there's nothing easy about Europe. And I've heard, just speaking to some, they say, well, the racing here is not hard enough. Everyone marks me, and these kinds of comments. And I say, like, well, in Europe, you could be lining up on a kermesse with 200 people that are as strong as you, if not stronger. And so you need to figure out how to win here first. And so in saying that, moving forward, when you do start to get to that level where you are present in every race, and if you can be in North America, if you're not a results getter, you're someone who can be in the breakaways, you're part of the action. I think that's really important. For one, just to get the attention of directors and people talking about you, because those spots on teams aren't just going to happen magically just because you ride a bunch of people and you have a good social media presence. And there's a big important aspect to that balance. So if you do get the opportunity to race in Europe, understand that just what happens there in the month or two that you're there, it's not the end of the world. It's part of a process, right? So for one, in Europe, you have this extra thing where you're far away from home. You're living in a totally different environment. And then the racing is just, it's not that everyone's better than you. It's that they've been racing in that environment since they were 13 years old. And they know every corner. They know how the winds are in this certain area. There's so much more knowledge, right? And so it's kind of like you're learning all over again. So I think you really have to have that understanding when you do go over to Europe. It's just like a journeyman. You're learning an apprenticeship, right? And there's some very hard lessons in there, and it's not always going to go how you want it. But you go and you get a taste, and you come back, and you're that much stronger. You race at home, and you show everyone what you've been doing, how much stronger you are, and then you go for another hit again. And I believe that's kind of the best balance if you can work that, and that's why I'd love to see national team projects coming back again, right? Because that's the best way we can do that. Create a good environment for our younger riders to get a taste, but then still be part of the North American scene where they can actually go to win races, because all of those qualities are crucial to making you an all-around rider.
Svein, just shortly, and on the tail end of that question, you had an experience where you raced at the World Tour, Pro Tour, whatever it was called, and you had a little stint back in North America. What did you discover? Are some of these things that you just talked about, did they come out of that experience that you had riding back in North America?
Oh, for sure. I was on an amateur team with Broadmark Capital, and then I also that was a time when the national team still had quite a few projects. So I was doing Pan Am Championships, Tour Guadeloupe, some races down in the Caribbean, and Tour de Beauce with the national team. And then I got a stagiaire position with Mercury Viatel, which was what would be considered a World Tour team now. And I was a fish out of water. I knew nothing about European racing. And so right away, I'm getting thrown into like World Tour races in September on a team that was basically going defunct. The owner could no longer pay the riders. The riders were miserable. So here I am with like hardened pros like Fabricio Guidi and Leon Van Bon and these guys that weren't getting paid. And my eyes were just wide open, and I was soaking it all up. But I was in races like GP Plouay and really like kind of World Tour races. And then my final race was Tour de l'Avenir. And I was on our team. We had Baden Cook, who, is a green jersey wear at the Tour de France, and he was on a whole other level. And I went from a very nice kind of family-based team to like the hardened professional team. And in that year, I saw everything. And so I still will say, like, I don't think I've ever raced more days in my career than that. That was one of, like, I think maybe that was my second year of racing. And I crashed out of Tour de l'Avenir, flew home on 9/11, got grounded in Newfoundland for 10 days. And I wasn't coming back to the bike in my mind at that time, because I crashed really bad out of Tour de l'Avenir. And I just said, this is not for me, And I remember I didn't unpack that bike probably for 2 or 3 months after I got home. So yeah, that was an important crossroads again for me, because anything could have happened at that point. So yeah, those are the things you kind of go through in this racing world. But I felt really lucky that I got to be exposed to all of those crazy aspects in 1 year, because it helped form me going forward. I was ready for anything. Once I decided to come back, I was ready.
Thanks, Svein. And thanks a lot, Thomas, for your question. I hope Svein answered it. I think so. That was all there.
More than answered my question. Thank you very much, Svein.
Thanks, Thomas, and best of luck this season. We're going to go now to a young lady you know pretty well, I think, Svein, as you've been her Bridge the Gap mentor in the past. She now rides for an international team based out of Canada. It's Gérard Penaroya's Makojep Tornatec outfit. She is moving over to Europe, if all goes well, very soon. She's part of the next gen track team, coached by Rich Wolves. Callie Swan. Hi, Callie.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Good self. What's your question for Svein today?
My question today is, what are the 3 most important traits you would consider for being a team player?
That's a great question, Callie. One resonates a lot with me, because I think kind of going along with the comment I made earlier, like, one of the things I always recommend to younger riders who are making that initial step to an international team or a European team is find your niche. And one of the things that, it's always hard, because we always want to find our way through results. We want to win races, but the reality is you have to find your niche and do some of the hard yards first. And quite often that comes through being an awesome teammate. And my advice for everyone is, if you do get that opportunity, you capitalize on being the best teammate you can be, because that's what's going to get you signed again. That's what's going to make you stronger through a season. And that's where you're going to learn the most and be part of an organization that really wants you at every race. And so I'm going to say my number one thing for being a great teammate is adaptability. And by that, I mean, always being someone who can change on the fly. You're ready for anything. You're always ready to race. So when they call you up, just because they told you, you have 2 weeks off, this is what you're doing. I know sometimes that could be the worst call ever, but you're there. You're over in Europe. You're there to race, and you're there to show them that you want to race and be part of that team, right? And so that adaptability means doing everything, like everything you can to make, like I said, with racing back home, racing in North America, being a presence within your team. So when you sit down after the race is over and you have that meeting, a lot of people might have been doing their own thing, and the team might have failed. But when they have to talk about you, it's like, there's nothing they can say. You did everything. You got bottles, you helped ride in the wind, you helped with the lead out. You were like spot on the entire day. And then there's, for me, that's the most important thing, is that you have a job and that you're well respected day in and day out, so that if that team is moving on or changing the structure of their program, you're well renowned. And you have, when someone asks about you moving forward, they say, yeah, she was awesome. I mean, she's an awesome teammate. Boom, you have a contract based on just that word of mouth, because of who you are, right? And I think that's something really important to remember. We can't all win races all the time, and even the best riders, how many times can they win a race? Like a great season is 5 wins at a professional level, right? You might do 80 races. So, there's 75 other races where you still need to be effective. And I think to always think like that. So the second one is I think just being humble, just being a person who listens and is not always out there kind of flaunting themselves as they're going to win this race or that race. You speak with your legs, and you don't have to always run your mouth. and so yeah, it's a trait that I think quite often happens naturally in Europe because it's so hard anyways. But I think it's just something to always remember. Speak through your actions, speak with your legs, and be humble. And the third one is create real friendships within the team, because quite often you're going to find that say if you do race 70 to 80 races in a year, there's some days you just don't even want to be there. That's natural. You don't let that bring you down, but that's just the reality. But when you have real friendships and the job is on the line to support that friend, it's now not about the team or the team's objective. It's about helping that friend succeed. So you might be down and out. You might be tired, blown out from whatever the stage race the week before, you got sick. Things could be at an all-time low, but your friend is now in a position to do well in this race. And now you'll find something special out of yourself to give to them. And I think that's something to always remember, that it's not always going to be perfect on teams. It's an organization of many people, and there's going to be all kinds of conflicting characters. But if you can do your best to create real relationships with those people, kind of understand them at their level, maybe they're not your kind of person, but just be that person who's friendly to everyone, because you're going to need to kind of pull that out of yourself when there's those moments when you just want to ride at the back and do nothing. Believe me, I've had many of those days, but the thing that's brought me forward and made me push myself that much further is just the fact that that's one of my best mates, and he needs my help right now, and I need to be there. It's that accountability for them. So yeah, I could go on, but I think those ones really kind of stood out for me.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. So
be a team member, humility, and create those friendships, create that network, and you're golden. Thanks, Callie. Best of luck.
Thank you.
We're going to move on now to our friend who is now in the Netherlands right now. Alors, on dit bonjour à Josephine Peloquin. Josephine, qui est présentement aux Pays-Bas. She's riding with the Watersley R&D team, also with Adèle Desgagnés. Salut, Josephine.
Salut, Andy.
Hi, Adèle aussi. So we got a 2-for-1. We got Adèle Desgagnés and Josephine in the Netherlands. Josephine, ta question pour Swain, your question for Swain.
Yeah, so my question is, as a North American living and racing in Europe, what were the main challenges you had to face? It can be bike related or not, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, another super question. As you guys know, living away from home and doing long periods of time away from home and outside of your normal environment, that gets very difficult. I always found, for me, and I don't know, maybe everyone's different, but the biking part was never the tricky aspect. It was the living far away from home, the environment that you're in, and then just trying to figure out European living. And I'm going to say the number one thing I did that really changed my life over in Europe, because at first I was kind of fighting it. I struggled with that decision of going to Europe in the first place. And I remember I did what everyone did. I got an apartment in Girona, and I'm someone who always lived out in kind of rural countryside. That's what I love. I like to be kind of close to nature as much as possible. And living in a city in a small apartment, it was kind of killing me, and so here I was in my first year with a professional contract. I'm trying to do my best on that end, but I didn't like my living environment. I felt out of place in a city. It was too much for me, right? And so one of the best decisions I ever made was to move out to the countryside. And it, like financially, it cost me a lot more. It was a much bigger investment, but I saw it as an investment in what I was doing. And sometimes in life, you have to back yourself. You have to just say, this is what I'm doing. You have to look at the big picture and say, this is going to help me in the long run. Okay, maybe I could save more money in the short term, right? But for me, it was so important to have that connection to nature and just be back in a place where I just felt like I had space again. So whatever that is for you, create a space that you're happy to come home from after racing, because racing is hard, and you'll be a week traveling from hotel and long transfers, and then maybe you drive 8 hours back from the race. Mentally, you're just kind of cooked. You need to come home to a place that you love. You like everything about it. You feel comfortable. You start to create some connections in the local community. All of those aspects are just gonna make life better for you while you're over there away from home, because it's hard. It's hard what you guys are doing, and I commend anyone doing what you guys are doing right now, because I know the feeling. So hats off, and all the best to you guys. I hope that kind of resonates.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it was a great answer. Thank you.
And it's great today. Merci, Josephine. Merci, Adèle. Bonne chance cette saison. It's great. We have people that are in the Netherlands right now, Svein, France, Croatia, Spain, East Coast, West Coast. I think we even had somebody in Switzerland. So we really have an international field here today for awesome. This event. Thanks for being with us. Et merci, mesdemoiselles. On se parle bientôt.
Merci.
We're going to go now. We're talking about development and the transition of moving to Europe and trying to make it in the big leagues, if I may say so. But we have also had some success stories right here in Canada. And if we look at since 2015, we have the Manabe Homes Velodrome now in Milton. And this next young man, like Michael Foley and others, is a product of Racer Sportif and Manabe Homes Cycling Club. He's coached by Petrina Toulouse. And today we're joined by Michael Leonard. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about what you want to know from Svein and your experience.
Hello, thank you for taking my question. So I'm wondering to what extent is sort of advancing in pro cycling about the sort of results and the power you can put down versus the sort of skills and relationships you can develop? And then sort of the skills and relationships, which do you think are most important and how would you recommend developing them?
Yep. Once again, yeah, another fantastic question. I think a lot of us put a lot of emphasis on our power data and what we can do at home on the bike. And while those things are very important, our training files and all that stuff, it doesn't give you a professional contract, unfortunately, unless you're 10% above everyone else, then people really take an interest. So then you say, well, then how's it done? And it really goes back to that whole point I'm harping on is that durability throughout the season. So, first and foremost, being someone who really looks at the training over the long term and focuses on just being strong throughout the season and not riding this roller coaster. So teams start to notice that when you have a presence from the very spring, the early races, right to the end. They go, well, that's a very important aspect. We can rely on that person because when we call them up, they're going to be ready to go. And I think that's a very important thing to always remember. It's like we always want to strive for these peaks or these certain races where we think we're going to be, amazing. And when that doesn't go right, sometimes it's a big blowout. And sometimes you need a month to recover from that because you went so full on to get to that point, right? And racing is crazy because we never know how it's going to work out. Even at your best form, certain things can happen, crashes, sicknesses, all kinds of things are thrown at you. So my policy has always been be durable for the whole season because now you have so many more opportunities to race. You're statistically, your odds just go way better. So yeah, it's great to be powerful. It's great to have a great sprint. It's great to be a great pack handler. But what gets you on a team is that durability. Touching on some of the things I spoke about before, just being a humble person who speaks with his legs, his or her legs, and being someone who's just a presence all the time, so that there's not even a question. When you send them that email, they know exactly who they're talking about, and they go, "Wow, that kid's strong. Oh, that kid was always in the breakaway last year." I think those kind of connections and the things that you can create that way are going to take you a lot further than just having a great physiological test at a lab.
Does that sum it up for you, Michael? I think, as Svein was mentioning, a lot of the stuff that he spoke to earlier on really connects with your question. And what he just added there is even more pertinent, I think, to what you were inquiring about.
Yeah, that was an excellent answer. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks a lot. Best of luck this season. We're going to go now to a man who's finished fourth at Junior Worlds on the track in a team with Riley Pickerel, and he's also aiming for the track during the Paris Olympic Games. Let's all go meet Jackson Kinniburg. Jackson, what's your question for Svein?
Hey, my question is, what was a challenge or a hard moment that was really rewarding to overcome during your career?
Yeah, that took me a while, because I feel like I've been fairly lucky in my time as a rider, but there was a period where I was part of a team called Symmetrics. It was one of Canada's professional teams, and we spent 2006, 2007 chasing after the UCI Americas Tour, and the idea was to create more spots for Canadian riders in the Olympics. And in 2007, I won the Americas Tour, and we had a hell of a really good year. And I just thought, like, for me, I was kind of at the peak of my career, like physically. I was definitely still quite green as a bike racer, but going on to 2008, I thought, oh, for sure, winning the Americas Tour and winning a lot of the important races in North America, that I for sure had a spot in the in the Olympics. And you know, sure enough, that winter, the way I understood it was that I was maybe not going to go, you know, and up to that point, the extent of what I wanted to do with cycling was to go to the Olympics and try and compete at that level. You know, that was a big goal for me. And I remember being very disillusioned. And I remember that year I really contemplated quitting the sport. I spent quite a bit of time up in the Kootenays, and I was just backcountry skiing and cross country skiing. I actually never touched the bike until, I don't think I started training until would have been April, when the weather started getting good. So, you know, I look back at that time, and I was very disillusioned, and like I said to you, that was a real crossroads in my life, and I could have chosen a different path that wouldn't have allowed me to live all these other beautiful years in cycling after that. And I guess the thing that really kind of, to bring that home, is there's going to be a lot of moments in cycling where you're just going to be like, what am I doing? What is this for? And, you know, if I was to look back and give advice to anyone, I will say, I'm so glad I chose the cycling option. It was a bad time, you know. There's just a lot of other things going on in my life, but I'm so happy that I continued on in that path, doing the work because everything we're doing now, it's building, whether it's in cycling, it applies to everything else you'll do in life. And you want to finish, no matter where this thing finishes for you, you want to finish proud and happy of what you did. So when you move on, you can apply all the stuff that you learned from that life. And so yeah, it's kind of a roundabout way, but that was a moment where I definitely had some struggle, and I was seriously contemplating quitting the sport when I was at, for me, an all-time high, which is really weird. You know, I remember even it was a weird time in general. I remember going to the Olympics, and Symmetrics had folded, so we had stopped getting paid. So I was basically I was going into debt go to the Olympics. I remember I asked Cervelo for help getting a TT bike, and they said they could help me, but I had to pay, and that just wasn't an option. And I was disillusioned because I was a Canadian company, and I thought, geez, what better thing to have, help work with a Canadian Olympian. And I'll never forget this till the day I die. But Orbea, one of the representatives up in Penticton, he helped me get an Orbea bike. And the story goes like this: they said, we'll give you the bike, but you need to give it back. And I said, hey, that's great by me. Like they said, give it back after the World Championships. And then they said, you can keep it if you get a medal. And we all laughed, like that's ridiculous. So in that year, I got a silver medal at the World Championships. They let me keep the bike. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff we're up against as Canadian cyclists, right? We think that if you go into the Olympics, it should be very cut and clear, like you should have all the support. But quite often, it's not that easy. And it's not like people think, like people at that level have everything sorted out and it's all good. But I'll tell you what, it wasn't the case for me,
It's not always an easy affair, and this is one of the goals of having these Bridge the Gap conversations, is to prepare people for such events. And as you well said, Svein, it's not always an easy, done and sealed deal when you're a Canadian. You got to do the extra kilometers sometimes to get that help and that funding, and even a bike for, you're an Olympian. You got to look for your own bike. But that's just the way it is right now. But this is what we're working on. And thanks for sharing that. And Jackson, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Best of luck this season. We're going to go now to Jack Burke, Crazy Jack, who has been all over the place. He's been training in the States, rides for an Austrian team, and based out of Croatia. Jack, you know Svein pretty well too, as he has been your Bridge the Gap mentor.
Yeah, I guess I have to apologize a bit because I've probably bothered you with this question personally maybe 15 times. But something I'm really fascinated with is people's journeys from like just trying to get to the World Tour level. And I find that really interesting. And the way I've kind of broken it down in my mind is there's always been like 3 kind of categories for it. There's like talent, there's opportunities, and there's work ethic. And like talent and opportunities, obviously you can't really change that much. And everyone works super hard at this level. And I've always been curious about that. But then I can think of a lot of examples of guys that had a ton of talent, worked super hard, had like normal opportunities like everyone else, and didn't quite make it. And then some guys that did. And I'm just curious, what do you see as like the attributes, whether it's like personality or just the commonality attributes of the guys that made it? Because everyone has such a different story to getting to the top. And it's so like you're an example of a crazy path that got there. But what are the common attributes of the guys that actually make it to the top versus maybe guys that had all the talent, all the numbers, the other stuff, but it just didn't work out for them?
Yeah, that's a super important question, Jack. And yeah, we've discussed this quite a bit. I think it's something important for everyone to hear. The guys who make it, the guys and girls that make it, they are, my experience has been is they have this stubborn belief, right? So no matter what kind of crossroad they run into, they keep pushing forward. They don't let a lot of things phase them. They don't let minor roadblocks and blips in their training or their experiences racing phase them. They just keep pushing forward. They have this idea of who they are and what they can be, and they keep pushing towards that. But they're also, I find, highly intelligent, because going back to something I touched on earlier, was that they find their niche really quickly. They understand where do they fit in the organization, and they capitalize on that. So those things are the things that are going to get you, like going back to just the amount of races you can do and being part of the team and being, we're all looking for acceptance in some way, and that's an important aspect to what you're doing, because once you become an integral part of the culture of the team, you're now given specific jobs that they know you can complete. And so, like I said, when you have those meetings at the end of the race, you're accountable, but you're proud of how accountable you were that day, right? So those are the people that keep moving up. And whether I've seen some people that don't have those genetic traits of the super freaks, the super talents, but because they're hardwired to figure out how they're going to make it and survive within that organization, they find all of their little niches, all of the things that others won't do, they do. And I think that's something really important about those first steps as a Canadian cyclist coming over in Europe. And I think it's also, they're not delusional, right? Some people they might be stubborn and hard-headed, but they have this idea of, they think there's something amazing, when the reality is, it doesn't matter how strong you are. Those first few years in Europe, as you know, Jack, you can be pushing 500 watts, but if you aren't positioned right, you can be 500 watts by yourself out the back, right? And it's 2 years of I always say, when you first get over to Europe, it's going to be 2 years of learning all over again, bike racing. And that's I don't see that as a negative, because going back to that 10-year projection, it's like, that's part of the apprenticeship. That's just part of what we have to do. So yeah, it's about understanding your position within the organization, and then capitalizing on the niche jobs that you can do day in and day out. And then, like I said, when we have the meetings, when the directors talk about who they're going to sign for next year, they go, oh, yeah, she's awesome. Every time up for a race, up to do the work, let's sign her again, And I think those are the things that really stand out for me. And that's my experience. So it's different for everyone, but yeah, I hope that makes sense, Bud.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Definitely the work ethics, Svein. I think you talk to any coach, any sélectionneur, as they say in French, that would be one of the first things that they look at, even beyond performance, is the work ethic of an athlete. Thanks, Jack. Best of luck this season, man.
Cheers. Thanks, Randy. Thanks for doing all this.
My pleasure. It's a team effort, just like cycling. We're going to take our last question here, and this is a question from a rider who's from Quebec, been riding he rode with the Dynamique de Contrecoeur for the last few years as a junior, then moved over to France to join Les Sables d'Olonne in the Vendée region. Also been part of some projects with Team Quebec. And Svein, he has a question for you today, and I know him personally, and his question is in regards to something that he's going through right now. Salut, Felix Robert, qui avec les Sables d'Olonne se joint à nous aujourd'hui. Felix, your question for Svein.
Hi. So my question was, have you ever had an injury that prevented you from riding for a couple of weeks? And if yes, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, that's definitely something we all deal with, Robert. I've been lucky in my career. I've never broken any bones, but I've had a lot of crashes and concussions and things like that. It's part of what we do. So, you just kind of accept that every season something can happen. You don't obsess about it or worry about it. You just know that, yeah, there's the probability of that happening. For example, in a Grand Tour, if I only had one crash, I considered that a pretty good Grand Tour. And if I got out clean, I was very happy. But I think back to one of my worst crashes. I was in the Tour of Romandy, and I was on a really important year for me because we had an important Giro d'Italia right after that with team time trial. So, that was always my thing. And then also I would do the Tour de France after. So my mind was on the Tour de France. We had also a team time trial in there. That was stuff that I really got excited about. So this was a big year for me. And I was getting bottles for a teammate before the last climb in one of these circuit races in Switzerland at the Tour of Romandy. And long story short, I ended up getting pinched in with road furniture and I went over the bars and landed on a guardrail, but the guardrail had a pole that kind of stuck up from the edge of the guardrail, and so I smashed my chest, and so I had massive contusion in my heart, and so I had to go to the hospital, and basically I was I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 days, and my wife came and picked me up, and we took our way home, getting back to Andorra, and in my mind, all I could think about was, I don't think I'm going to be able to make the Tour de France, and I needed 2 to 3 weeks of recovery out of this, maybe even longer. And they didn't really know. They had to check for some enzymes and this and that. But my mind was just, how am I going to get to the Tour de France, right? I knew I was going to not make the Giro because that happens a week after Romandy. So I started thinking, and I called my sport director and the head sports scientist, the coach that I work with on the team. I said, guys, I'm doing the Tour de France. I'm gonna sort this out. I'm gonna get an altitude camp going, and I'm just gonna hike every day. So as soon as I got home, I'm in Andorra. We live at altitude, but there's a mountain close by at 3,000 meters. So I set up a camp up there, and basically I hiked every day. So it was 2 hours up to the top and 2 hours back. So I would do this trip day in and day out with a big pack, and for almost a month, I basically lived up on the mountain at 3,000 meters and experienced all kinds of weather. But it was doing something that I loved, but it was the way that I could continue doing something that was very important to me in a way that kind of just kept me on track, kept me focused. Instead of staying at home and watching TV and riding the trainer, I turned this into something that kept me propelling forward. And that year, I raced Tour Swiss just before the Tour de France, and then I rode the Tour de France. And that's something, looking back, I'm like, geez, that was crazy. You probably couldn't pay me enough to do that now, but that was where my mind was at. And I think it's something that we always have to think of, like, how can we turn this bad situation into the better situation? How are we going to move forward from this, right? Instead of going like, oh, poor me, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to miss these races or this important training period. It's just like, keep pushing forward. That's it. And when I look back at that story, that's what it meant for me. It's like, that's where I was at in my life. And that's what allowed me to kind of tick off the objectives of that year, which, for me, the Tour de France was kind of number one, because it was a period of my life where I didn't know how many more Tour de France's I was going to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Felix. Merci, and best of luck in your season and getting back to full shape. We know it's been frustrating for you lately, but keep in there. And Svein, on that matter, also it's a question you touched a bit on. I'd like to hear you before we wrap up here on the subject of Felix's question. Is being able to reach out for help. Sometimes an athlete at a higher level will kind of want to shy away from talking openly about it, but it's a good thing to reach out and ask for help, especially on teams where you do have the medical personnel to help you out.
Definitely. There's a weird stigma in our sport where reaching out and asking for things like help, or like when you're going through a rough period, there's a stigma attached to it that it's a weakness. And I think that's something we have to change, because we all need help. We all have moments in our careers or our lives where things go a little sideways. It's not always perfect. And to have resources and people who have been through it, whether that's like an older teammate, a director who's been through it, you need to open up to that stuff, because I tell you, like, you need to lean on those people who've been through it, because most of the time you think, they won't want to talk to me about that. But I'm telling you, if you try, odds are they've been through it, or they know what you're talking about, or they know someone who can help you with that. And I think that's a great point, Randy, is to never be afraid to ask. And I'm always telling the mentees and the younger people that I work with, don't be afraid. There's no dumb question. The worst questions are the ones that aren't asked. And that's something you always have to remember, is that most of the older guys that have been around the block, they've experienced a little bit of everything, and a lot of the guys I know, they'd be more than happy to help and talk about it. But when I speak amongst friends who are doing similar things, like on other teams, say team captains, they say a lot of the young people don't ask. They feel that they're afraid to ask. So then, for me, there's a big part of the experience is lost. And the best thing we can do is keep that discussion going. And that's why I think stuff like this is so important. And yeah.
Thanks a lot, Felix. Merci, Felix. And thanks, Svein. Unfortunately, it's been such an interesting conversation we've got going here. We're going to have to move to closing this, and we won't be able to get to some direct questions off this Bridge the Gap conversation, but be well aware that we are going to answer everybody who had some questions, either through our Instagram blog or through YouTube. We will get back to you, so stay tuned on more Bridge the Gap conversations coming up. And before we sign off, Svein, I just wanted to say thank you. We didn't have time to talk about the upcoming book either. This will be for another day. And I know you got a lot going on in your personal life, moving and coming back to Canada and all that. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for all the work you've done with Bridge the Gap, and that you continue doing, and really taking this hour or so of your time to just talk about your experience. It is golden, and I know, and I can see the faces of our athletes out there. So much has been learned and so much has been taken in today. So big thanks, Svein.
Thanks to all of you and everyone who put this together, but also all the young riders out there. This doesn't work without you guys taking part and interacting with us. So that's a really important step forward.
Thanks a lot. And we'd like to also thank Cycling BC. And we are going to be doing some of these provincially with some of the PSOs, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Quebec. Alors, au Québec, oui, également, on aura des conversations Bridge the Gap qui s'en viennent. We'll be doing webinars that cover off in more detail some of the questions that were brought up today with Svein, and many more. As we said, thank you very much to Erin Waugh, the CEO of Cycling BC, for her help, and recognizing all of our BC coaches that have been on the call today. Thanks, guys. It was great to have you here, and look to Bridge the Gap for more upcoming webinars. Some of them are already scheduled. We also have some with, I think, Leah Kirkman has one coming up very soon. So anyway, pay attention to the website, pay attention to social media. It's all going to be up there very soon. And last and foremost, what you saw here today was an effort, a team effort. It was a team that was brought together through a concern of making sure that Canada stays at the forefront of developing riders, but also developing cycling as a sport in this country. I'd like to thank Kevin Fields, Richard Woods. I'd like to thank also Andrew Paradowski, who took care of the technical side on all this, and many more. These guys work behind the scenes to put all this together and make it happen. Alors, merci, messieurs. Thank you, gentlemen. And we are going to sign off now. But before we do, a last reminder, if you liked what you saw today, if you learned some things, if you really think that this is worth your while and your time, talk about it. Share it with other riders. We have riders all over the country, all over the continent, and in Europe. Talk about it. Let's get the discussion rolling. Let's keep this up. And hey, it's a team effort, right? The more the merrier. And you can go fast on your own, but you can go much farther as a team. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks, Wayne. Take it easy.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.